A 19-year-old student walks from a party back to her dorm, just a few minutes on foot. A familiar campus, lit up buildings. She will never make it. She won't be found a year later or 10 years later. She won't be found even 25 years later. There is still no body to this day. How do you prove a murder when there is no body, no scene, and no piece of evidence you can lay in front of a jury? And why was the man who was the last person to see Kristin Smart alive not put on trial for a quarter of a century? Even though investigators were looking at him from day one, this is the story of a case that sat untouched for 20 years. It wasn't a detective who moved it. It was a voice in a pair of headphones. Kristin Denise Smart is 19 years old, and it seems she has her whole life ahead of her. She's a freshman at California Polytechnic State University, a large school in the California town of San Luis Obispo. Everyone just calls it Cal Poly. She was born on the 20th of February 1977. Hers is a family of teachers. Both her father, Stan, and her mother, Denise, work in education. Kristin has a brother and a sister. Before college, she had already worked as a lifeguard and as a counselor at a children's camp. An ordinary biography, nothing dark in it. She finished high school in Stockton in '95, and that same fall, she left to study at Cal Poly. By that fateful night, she has nearly her entire freshman year behind her, the very start of adult life, the 24th of May, 1996. It's a long weekend across the country. Memorial Day is coming up. Students are relaxing. The campus moves at an easy pre-holiday rhythm. Kristin heads out to a party. It's not far, just a few minutes from her dorm. Every student knows the route, a few blocks, past familiar buildings, to the red brick building called Muir Hall, where Kristin has her room. She has almost nothing with her. No money, no bank cards, no keys. That's not how someone leaves who's planning to run away or take off somewhere. She's simply going to a party, and she's planning to come back. But she will never reach her own door. She won't come back that night. She won't come back a week later. She won't come back a year later. She won't be found 10 years later, or 20. Kristin's body has not been found to this day, and more than a quarter of a century has passed. The whole story begins with a short, ordinary route that thousands of students walk without a second thought. And somewhere along that stretch, between a stranger's lawn and a red brick wall, everything stops. On paper, the route is simple. That night, it played out differently. Around 2 in the morning, Kristin is found on a stranger's lawn, unconscious. She had too much to drink at the party and can't walk on her own. She's noticed by 2 students who are heading back from the same celebration, Cheryl Anderson and Tim Davis. They don't just walk past. They do what any decent person would do. They pick the young woman up to get her back to the dorm and let her sleep it off in her own room. On the way, one more person joins this little group, a fellow student named Paul Flores. He lives on campus, and his building is closer to Kristin's than Cheryl's dorm. Flores says he'll get Kristin home safe. That phrase will later be repeated hundreds of times, in the case files, in news reports, in the courtroom. But that night, it sounds like an ordinary courtesy. Cheryl Anderson leaves first, toward her building, and leaves Kristin with Flores. The logic is simple. He's headed almost the same way. It's on his route. The young woman will be fine. After that, there is only one account of what happened, and it belongs to Paul Flores himself. By his account, he took Kristin only as far as his own building, Santa Lucia Hall. From there, he claims, she went on alone, toward her red brick dorm. There are no other witnesses to that part of the walk. No one ever saw Kristin Smart alive again. The last account of her is the word of the only person who was alone with her in the dark, a few dozen meters from her door. Everything that came after, 26 years of investigation, searches, podcasts, and trials, revolves around a single question. Can you trust the account of the man who himself turned out to be the last link in this chain? And what actually happened, where every independent account runs out? Why Flores's account stood unshaken for so long becomes clear from what happened right after that night. And almost nothing happened. Kristin doesn't show up in her room. She isn't at her classes. Her roommates don't see her for several days. And the response such a thing demands simply doesn't come. The campus police choose the convenient, reassuring conclusion. The girl probably just went away for the long weekend and didn't tell anyone. A student off having fun. Nothing unusual about it. That first label, a freshman off having fun, no crime here, will cost the case dearly. The official missing person report is filed almost a week after that night. A week. It isn't the campus or the police who raise the alarm. It's the Smart family. They call, they ask, they push. Her relatives understand before the system does. Kristin is not the kind of person who silently vanishes over a holiday with no money and no keys. Those lost days can never be brought back. The first hours and days after a person disappears follow their own rules. Witnesses still remember details. Trails are fresh. Things are still where they were. Nothing has been cleaned, washed, or hidden away yet. Every day lost is evidence that dissolves on its own. By the time Kristin's disappearance is finally taken seriously, part of that window has closed forever. All of California will eventually learn about this failure. The story of Kristin Smart will change the law. In 1998, an act bearing her name is signed. It will require the state schools to respond differently to reports of missing students and to work hand in hand with local police. Put simply, the state will officially admit the way Kristin was treated is not the way this should be handled. But in '96, none of that exists yet. There is a lost week, a convenient theory about she left and didn't say, and a slowly spreading understanding that something is very wrong with that theory. When the system finally wakes up, it quickly runs into one point. Specially trained dogs are brought to campus, the kind trained to find bodies. They're led through the buildings, the rooms, the places where Kristin might have been. And the dogs react. Not in a hallway, not outside, not by her dorm. They react confidently to the bed in Paul Flores's room, the same student who volunteered to get her home safe. By that time, the room has already been tidied, but the dogs react again and again. For investigators, this isn't yet proof in the strict sense, but it's a signal you can't ignore, and it lands on top of other oddities. A couple of days after Kristin's disappearance, Flores has a noticeable black eye. One of the witnesses, Mario Garcia, sees it in those days and describes Flores like this: jittery, on edge, clearly not himself. The black eye becomes a story of its own. Flores is asked where it came from, and the answer keeps changing. First a sports injury, then an accident on the way somewhere, then something else. All told, at least 3 different explanations for one mark on a face. For investigators, this is a familiar warning sign. The truth rarely comes in several drafts. An account that keeps changing is an account that's being adjusted. There's one more detail that will later be especially bitter. On a property connected to Flores's mother, an earring is found, similar to one Kristin wore, and this piece of evidence is lost. It isn't logged the way it should be. It simply disappears from the case. Years later, people will speak of it as a symbol of the entire early investigation. The leads were there, investigators reached them, and let them slip. By the end of the '90s, this is no longer a riddle about a student who went away. It's a crime with a very specific person at its center. The only thing is, between suspicion and a charge lies a gulf the investigation just can't cross. For years, they try to cross that gulf. Paul Flores is given polygraph tests. He's questioned again and again. Properties and homes connected to his family are searched. Every theory is pursued. Every spot the dogs and the rumors point to is dug up. From '96 to 2007, a string of attempts at the same target. The result is the same every time. Nothing that would hold up in court. There is a suspect. He's the same one all these years. And there's no body of evidence to support a murder charge. No body, no scene, no physical piece of evidence you can lay in front of a jury and say, this unmistakably ties him to Kristin's death. The result is an agonizing situation. Everyone roughly understands who to look at, but the law needs proof, not understanding. In 2002, a bitter formality takes place. Kristin Smart is officially declared dead, legally. That decision answers none of the questions. It doesn't say what happened to her, where she is, who is to blame. It only records what those close to her already know in their hearts. She is no longer alive. For the family, this isn't closure. It's another open wound now with an official stamp on it. The Smart family never backs down through all of this. Kristin's parents, her brother and sister, year after year, push to keep at least some movement going, refusing to let the case settle into a dusty file. But time itself works against them. Witnesses age and move away. Memories fade. Public interest dies down. Paul Flores remains for decades the only suspect, and a free man at the same time. By the mid-2000s, the case effectively stalls. Not closed, not solved. It just sits there. for almost 20 years, and it seems that the usual investigative methods can no longer move it. The push will come from a direction no one expected. It doesn't come from a police station or a prosecutor's office. It comes from a pair of headphones. In September 2019, Chris Lambert, a musician, never a detective or a journalist, launches a documentary podcast called Your Own Backyard. The title will turn out to be ominously precise. Lambert isn't chasing a sensation for his first episode. He moves slowly and meticulously. Episode by episode, he takes the disappearance of Kristin Smart apart in detail. That night, that route, the statements, the oddities, the lost week, the black eye, the dogs, the years of stagnation. He talks to people, digs up old materials, lays it all out calmly and carefully. And then something happens that 20 years of official effort couldn't achieve. People listen to the podcast. It's downloaded more than 30 million times. Kristin's case goes from a local tragedy to a story the whole country is following. But it's not really about the listening numbers. The key thing is that the podcast brings witnesses back to the investigation. People who had stayed silent for years, some out of fear, some who thought their memories were trivial, some who were simply never properly asked, start coming forward. They hear the whole story and realize their piece might be the missing one. Some of this information Lambert never puts on the air. It's too sensitive, and he hands it directly to investigators rather than turning it into a public spectacle. The effect builds up. For decades, there had been no public pressure, and suddenly it becomes enormous. Staying silent and dragging things out is no longer possible. Millions are following the case. Later, the county sheriff will say it outright. The podcast helped witnesses speak up and genuinely move the investigation forward. A case that had sat for almost 20 years suddenly starts moving again. And the main question now is a different one. No longer, will anything at all ever turn up? But what exactly the people who stayed silent for more than 2 decades will say, and where that will lead the investigation. Their accounts will become the framework of the future prosecution. Much of it will be heard later in the courtroom under oath. And the picture that emerges from their words will turn out to be far darker than a student who volunteered to walk a girl home. People who lived in the same dorm in '96 will speak up. Several women will speak up about their own experiences with Paul Flores, about how, in their words, he behaved toward them. On its own, each such story is one person's pain and a difficult memory. Together, they form a consistent pattern of behavior. A detail from his school years will surface too. A nickname that his classmates, by their recollection, gave him long before Kristin's disappearance. By their own accounts, people were already keeping their distance from him back then. Witnesses will come forward who recall Flores's own words. By their testimony, at different times and in different ways, he let it be understood that Kristin was buried. This testimony had been going nowhere for years. It's just that no one had seriously collected it. A separate important thread is the property of Paul's father, Ruben Flores, in the town of Arroyo Grande. An ex-girlfriend of Paul's will recall being there once. She walked to the back of the house to look at the avocado trees and noticed that dogs were being kept under a deck. By her account, she was quickly led back to the front of the house and not allowed to linger there. On its own, a small thing. But in the prosecution's theory, this detail will fall into a broader pattern, a place that, according to testimony, outsiders weren't allowed near. With every such account, the center of gravity of the story shifts. No longer an abstract riddle about a missing student. A specific man, the words about being buried attributed to him by witnesses, and a place that, in the prosecution's theory, was worth a closer look. The backyard of his father's house, under the deck, where, by a witness's account, outsiders weren't allowed. And this is the place the investigation finally decides to examine for real. But first it goes after Paul himself. In April of 2020, his home in San Pedro is searched. Among the items seized, according to investigators, are objects that fit a theory of a pattern of behavior toward women. That doesn't directly prove Kristin's death, but it does finally shatter the image of a casual passerby. In February of 2021, Flores is detained on a separate weapons case. He is never let out of sight again. The main strike is being prepared at the father's property. In March of 2021, dogs trained to find bodies and ground-penetrating radar a device that can see beneath the ground without opening it up, are brought to Ruben Flores's house in Arroyo Grande. The equipment is taken exactly where witnesses said something had been hidden, under the deck by the house. The find moves the case. The prosecution states, under the deck, biological traces were found, and the soil there, according to its data, had not lain undisturbed all these years. On this, the prosecution builds its account of events. First, concealment here in the backyard. Then, the alarm, the publicity, the podcast, the attention, and then a relocation, so the body wouldn't be found where people had finally begun to look. Important. The court would later accept this theory with respect to Paul Flores, but not with respect to his father, whose involvement the jury would reject. This is why the body would never be found, not because it never existed. According to the prosecution's theory, it was moved time and again, covering the trail. That explains 25 years of fruitless searching, and it also creates an enormous problem for the prosecution. The jury can be shown traces under the deck, testimony, behavior, but the main piece of physical evidence in any such case, Kristin herself, cannot be shown. And with this set of evidence, strong but entirely circumstantial, the investigation arrives at the decision the Smart family had been waiting for a quarter of a century. The decision is made. On the 13th of April, 2021, almost exactly 25 years after that night on the lawn, Paul Flores is arrested. The date sounds almost symbolic, a quarter of a century of silence and suddenly handcuffs. He is charged with first-degree murder. That is the most serious wording. The investigation maintains, not chance, not an accident, but a deliberate crime. That same day, his father, Ruben Flores, is also arrested. He is charged as an accessory after the fact, that is, with having helped conceal the crime and the body after Kristin's death. The prosecution's theory is now laid out across two people. The son, on the charge, committed it. The father, on the charge, helped hide it. For the first time, the prosecution openly states a motive. By its account, Kristin died that very night in the dorm room, under circumstances the prosecution classified as an attack on her. There's a legal subtlety here. The statute of limitations on the attack itself had long since run out by then. That could no longer be tried. But murder has no statute of limitations. So, the prosecution is built around Kristin's death, while the attack stands as a circumstance explaining what happened and why. The investigation presents this difficult subject with restraint, without details. For the Smart family, this is the moment they had waited for nearly the entire adult lives of the younger children, and nearly their own old age. For 25 years they had been burying a daughter without a grave, refusing to let the case die, hearing not enough evidence. And now, 2 arrests, a murder charge, a name in the indictment. But an arrest is not yet a verdict. Ahead lies a trial, where the prosecution faces the nearly impossible, convincing a jury of murder without a body. The defense will strike exactly there. The whole question now is one. Will a mountain of circumstantial evidence be enough where the central proof is missing? Now, it's up to the jury to answer that. The trial begins in the summer of 2022 and lasts about 3 months. The scale of the case is clear from the preparation alone. After so many years of publicity, a fair trial on the spot is hard to hold. It seems everyone has heard of the Kristin Smart case, so the hearings are moved to another county, Monterey. To assemble an impartial jury, more than 1,500 summonses are sent out. The structure of the trial is unusual. Father and son are tried at the same time, but their cases are heard by 2 different juries. One decides the fate of Paul Flores on the murder charge. The other, the fate of Ruben Flores on the concealment charge. This is done because evidence against one doesn't always work against the other. The evidence against the son must not automatically sink the father, and the other way around. The prosecution lays out its theory in full. Kristin's death that night, during an attack in the dorm. Then concealment of the body on the father's property under the deck. Then a relocation, when the attention on the case became dangerous. In support come the women's testimony about Flores's behavior, witnesses' testimony about the words attributed to him about being buried, the dog's reaction to his room back in '96, the black eye with 3 explanations, the biological traces under the deck, the disturbed soil. The defense builds its line on exactly the gap everyone sees. No body, no place where she was found, no direct physical evidence tying Paul to the death itself. The defense calls the case a collection of coincidences, conjecture, and old, faded memories that can't be trusted a quarter of a century later. That's the whole weight of this trial. There will be no piece of evidence here, after which everything becomes clear. The jury is asked to assemble a mosaic out of dozens of circumstantial pieces and decide, do they add up to one single picture, or does room for doubt still remain? Their answer determines whether 26 years end with any kind of resolution at all. The jury answers on the 18th of October, 2022. The jury that tried Paul Flores finds him guilty of first-degree murder. The mosaic of circumstantial evidence that the defense called a collection of coincidences came together for them into one picture. 26 years after that night, the name of the man who volunteered to get Kristin home safe officially becomes the name of her killer. With the second defendant, it goes differently. Ruben Flores, the father, is acquitted by his jury on the accessory charge. There isn't enough evidence that he specifically helped conceal the body. In a single trial, two opposite outcomes. The son guilty of murder, the father set free. A case where for so long there had been nothing solid ends at once with both a guilty and a not guilty verdict. On the 10th of March, 2023, Paul Flores is sentenced, 25 years to life. Under California, rules that means he won't even be able to request parole before 2047. His attempts to challenge the verdict will later be rejected, the conviction left in force. Legally, the matter is settled. A man is answering under the law for the death of Kristin Smart. From the disappearance of a 19-year-old freshman to the sentencing of her killer, about 26 years pass. An entire generation. Children born in the year she disappeared had time to grow up and enroll in college themselves before the word guilty was spoken in this case. And yet one line in this case still remains blank. The dogs, the ground-penetrating radar, the biological traces, dozens of witnesses, a guilty verdict, and Kristin's body has not been found. The court established what happened and who is responsible for it, but it could not answer the question that matters most to her parents, her brother, and her sister. Where is she? Justice did come in this case, late, after a quarter of a century, at an enormous price. But it came. Even so, you still couldn't call it complete. When the noise around the verdict dies down, that is exactly what remains the main thing. Legally, the case is solved. There is a crime, there is a guilty man, there is a sentence. In human terms, no. And even after the trial, the searches never stopped. Investigators worked new sites years after the verdict, because the central thing was still never found. In its most human part, the case, in essence, remains open. At the same time, Kristin's story changed far more than the fate of one family. The law bearing her name rewrote the rules for California's schools. Now, a report of a missing student can't be brushed off as she left and didn't say, the way it was done with her in '96. Her case became a lesson the state put down in writing so that it wouldn't happen again to someone else. A separate lesson is in how this case got moving at all. 20 years of official effort never brought it to trial, and a few dozen episodes of a podcast made by an outsider brought back the witnesses, the attention, and the pressure that had been missing all those years. It's a rare example, and an almost uncomfortable one for the system. Sometimes a dead case comes back to life, not from within, but from outside, because someone talks about it loudly and stubbornly. But behind all the changes to the law and all the loud words about justice stands a simple and heavy thing. The Smart family got a verdict, but they did not get the right to bury their daughter. They learned who is to blame. They did not learn where she is. The system's early failure cost the case nearly 20 years. Those years can never be brought back, just as Kristin herself can never be brought back. The conclusion sounds restrained and bitter. The law did its work. The guilty man is behind bars. His name has been spoken aloud. And still this story has no ending. As long as the question that remains open to this day stays unanswered, what will someday bring Kristin home to those who waited for her all these years?